morning, everybody, and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bonds, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Frank Perkins of INARIIO. How you doing, Frank?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good, very good. Are you still in? You're based in Barcelona, aren't you?
I'm based in Barcelona, yeah.
Because it's a very grim sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon here in the UK. What's the weather like?
It's been good. We've had a really great Saturday was just pouring down. Sunday and today, clear blue skies. A little bit chilly, or what we consider chilly.
Yeah.
Pretty much summer for other people, I guess. So, but yeah, it was good.
It's funny. I don't know why I torture myself, because I keep doing these with people who are based in like California or somewhere, and it's just the Britishness in me that needs to ask how much better it is somewhere else than where we are. But and it is one way of getting around how dark it is. But before we dive in, we've got some talking points. I thought it'd be nice if you could introduce INARIIO and what you guys are doing over there in the insurtech space.
Yes, so INARIIO is a next generation insurance platform, and we like to say that we do the heavy lifting of insurance, right? And we give time back to people working in insurance companies. And so basically what we're able to do is digitize and virtualize the different things that happen in the management of the life cycle of risk into the platform. And so that could be things around policy administration, portfolio management, binder management, credit control, all the usual suspects of trading risk through its entire life cycle. And so we've been working on that and building the product and onboarding customers for the last 3 years. It's been a very, very exciting journey so far.
Oh, fantastic. And just to give a bit of context, you and I discussed before, actually, and we crossed paths sort of when you were sort of part of the AMV, but you're from sort of insurance, as it were. You've worked in the sort of IT infrastructure space in insurance prior to launching this business, didn't you?
Yeah. So I started in insurance around about 2006, and I think, as we always mention every time, you never come out of college saying, I really want to be in the insurance market. So rather by accident, I ended up at HCC Global here in Barcelona, which was quite a sizable MGA and vehicle within the HCC group. From there, I was very lucky enough, along with 4 other people, to co-found, or to be part of the founding team of AMV between 2010 and the exit in 2016 when we sold it to AmTrust. And that was a pretty amazing journey as well, because what set out to be sort of an MGA vehicle ended up having various Lloyd's syndicates and MGAs all around the world, and it was a very enlightening experience into the inner workings of insurance. And then from there into INARIIO. So it's a business hard to get out of once you're in.
Yeah. And I like the speed at which that must have been something to be part of a that's quite interesting to talk about, because a lot of what I like to talk about on these things is talking about a startup world. But what was that sort of journey like? Because that's pretty quick, isn't it? Start, build, exit, 6 years. Most people would take that when the AMV piece. Is that difficult to manage? Do you think some people fit that model? Some people don't, sort of personality wise?
Yeah, I mean, anything that's taking something that's conceptual that resides in your head or head of a group of people, and then take that to that sort of point, it requires a lot of resilience. It requires a lot of creativity. It requires to be very tolerant to actually challenging yourself, either you yourself challenging yourself, or the marketplace and situations that arise challenging yourself. It's a lot of hard work. There's a sprinkling of luck in there as well, being at the right place at the right time, I guess. And I think what I saw, especially through INARIIO from AMB, that there is a profile of person that are builders, that are people that really want to come in at the beginning of an adventure, and build out that idea and execute that vision. I think on that final point, execution is probably the most valuable asset in the startup space. You really need to be very execution heavy and execution focused.
Yeah. Well, a bit of a thing that I think I'm trying to create my own catchphrases rather than anyone watching saying I've got one, but certainly something that I keep saying is that, you know, everyone seems to have a really good idea within the insurance infrastructure because it's so big, and I think you can look at it and go, there's a problem to be solved there, and if the problem's big enough, someone will pay you money for it. It's kind of usually the piece, but there's a difference between spotting a problem and then executing on it, and executing well. But I think sometimes people get very excited about the idea, but you have got to deliver on that idea.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, something that you see as well is there's two additional factors that an idea that's really great on paper, sometimes in the real world just doesn't work out, right? And even if you have that execution, it just just doesn't play out as you think it would. I think the success stories are vital to the startup ecosystem, but also the things that couldn't get carried out until their finalization of the vision. It's all lessons learned, and it really does help build that sort of new generation or next generation entrepreneurs when they can look back and say, okay, well, you know, this worked out, this didn't work out. And I think anybody that likes setting up a business does it over and over again, and more get used to failing than succeeding. It's a lot of failure and very little success.
Yeah. I've just done my company accounts today. Talk to you about that. It's been some failing and achieving at the same time. No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's something really interesting that someone said to me recently about the other thing about the idea is it's got to be big enough. You know, is the juice worth the squeeze, as people say? You know, and I think that's where it's interesting talking about incumbent insurers versus kind of insurtechs. And a lot of the innovation and we sort of focus on is external to the insurance companies in insurtech space. But I think that the duty on an insurtech is to tackle a big enough problem, whereas innovation within an insurer, an incumbent insurer, could be quite small and have a massive impact because of their cost base, because of the scale. So in a way, they've got an advantage of they can arguably focus on smaller problems, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think whereas you have the insurtechs can be very, very nimble in terms of, you know, that sort of, you know, insurance is a moving target, right? You can have a problem that, again, on paper in 1 year is a problem. Then next year, you have to slightly pivot that idea for it to be successful. And I think, you know, it's very, very infrequently someone will have an idea, execute on that, and it'll be exactly what you set out to do in the beginning. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right with the incumbents that then the pain points or the areas where they need to or want to improve in their operations and their own execution. You know, sometimes it's very, very small things in the big scheme of things, but are very, you know, very widely resonating. I think the advantage that the incumbents have, you know, vis-a-vis sort of startups and insurtechs, is usually much more resource, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, as a startup, and even when you're starting to get into the break-even land, you know, there's that sort of financial risk that you have, right? You can't, you know, you have to think twice before, you know, hiring 4 or 5 more people so you have a really good thing that you want to build for the platform. I think for the incumbents, many of them don't have that issue. They have a lot of resource. They have interesting and attractive enough projects if pitched right to actually attract the right talent, mm-hmm. many times out of the industry in there. Mm-hmm. And I think, you know, one of the things we'll see more and more of incumbents is they won't try to, let's say, innovate or disrupt in their current structure, but rather saying, okay, well, this current structure is very, very big. Actually, let's take these pain points and let's extrapolate them into a newer structure with a slightly different philosophy and actually build up from there. And sometimes you'll find that, you know, these incumbents, it's just too big and too heavy to actually, you know, execute that innovation internally.
We've already started mentioning the I word. So you know, something that I'd like to ask people at the moment is you know, what does innovation mean to you in your world?
Yeah, for me, it means, and you're absolutely right. It means, you know, 10 people, 10 opinions on what that is. I mean, for me, what it means is to do something that hasn't been done before, mm-hmm. right? Or actually do something that has been done before, but in a very different way that creates value. Right? And I think that's especially relevant within our space. And, you know, you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel every single time. And there's times that you can look at our marketplace and say, okay, well, you know, if I bring together these types of people and this type of technology and maybe this different approach, you know, there's a new product to service the marketplace or a new way of doing things, right? It's completely new and can't be done. And other times it's just spotting something and say, okay, well, let's look at this problem and let's just, you know, turn it 360 degrees, spin it around and see if we can tackle it in a different way. And both of those things are innovation for me.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, you know, I think there's two things that you sort of mentioned there. It's about kind of deriving value and creating value. And I think sometimes that gets lost as well. Like, you know, there needs to be, it doesn't have to be immediate, but there does need to be a sort of ROI on these things. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's not innovation if you're losing money, right? Doesn't matter how cool it looks, you know.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in you know, maybe the last couple of years, and it goes back to, you know, ideas that are great in principle, but then in the real world may not have that resonance that one would expect. And I think there's been really great ideas, but when you look at the sort of the end game of that idea, it really isn't pushing the boundaries, or isn't truly innovating, or isn't even fixing the problem, or the actual effort to fix the problem isn't worth it, and we could just, you know, carry on as we were. So it is a tricky one. It's a very tricky one.
Do you think that speaks to culture? Because I think sometimes it's, you know, particularly someone described insurance to me as this, like, you know, it's a follower, it's a fast follower kind of marketplace. It's not for pioneers as such. And that was a massive generalization. Obviously, someone has to be pioneering, but as a general rule, the insurance market does tend to follow each other in its kind of direction. But if you're kind of if you've not got a culture of kind of innovation and change, we sort of almost get into this. You follow ideas that aren't necessarily because you feel like you should, I suppose, is what I'm getting at. It's like, you know, you're innovating or changing things because you think you should do, whereas there's not a kind of overall goal. It's just we feel like we should be doing something, so let's go and do something.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the tricky questions, right? Because you know, and looking from a more incumbent perspective, you know, these are regulated entities that report to, you know, to many different organisms that ultimately, in the end, need to be able to service the policyholders, you know, that we as an industry cover, and never lose sight of that. But I think, on the other hand, it's a very social and follow industry, as you say, and I think to drive that change. And we have seen innovation within insurance, not InsurTech, but if you look at some, you know, the big success stories in the insurance and reinsurance world, there've been a lot of stories, especially the very successful ones, of they've come and done things differently, either completely differently or again going to the other definition of innovation of the same thing, but in a very different way that drives that value. I think, you know, to innovate in a marketplace like insurance, it requires a lot of bold leadership. You know, you need to be able to, you know, funnily enough, for our marketplace, take risk. It needs to be very, very calculated, but you need to be prepared to take that risk. To take that risk, you need the support from the organization, which is very, very important. So I think innovation within the marketplace and sort of leaving startups to one side, because that sort of greenfield has the advantage of that. But I think, you know, this doesn't come from one single individual. It needs to be the joint support of the entire organization, you know, selecting where they want to disrupt or innovate. And then it requires you know, a fair degree of talent. And sometimes that means bringing in talent from industries that are external to insurance to provide sort of that fresh set of eyes.
Yeah.
You do need the expertise of, you know, insurance can be very, very complex and it's very, very nuanced. So you do need that expertise, and you need to sort of, again, with the leadership, bring those two things together. And then I think from, you know, just take a step back and when looking at driving change within insurance and with innovation, not only looking at from the perspective of, you know, am I going to save some percentage points on my expense ratio or slightly lower my combined ratio, but actually, you know, again, sometimes we lose sight that there's a policyholder somewhere, right? And so how does this change better serve them, which I think is the responsibility that we have in
Yeah.
the industry, ultimately to the policyholder. So it's a complex, multifaceted, multidimensional sort of thing to look at when doing this.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult sometimes in business. You can be very abstract and forget that there's, particularly in insurance, you can forget that there's an end consumer. You know, there's a real life, you know, customer that is sitting there buying the thing. Because I often talk about the psychology of customers, because I think it's very difficult, even when you work within insurance, to kind of differentiate the experiences you have. So if you buy insurance online personally, the process now is pretty slick, pretty efficient. You know, it's you can put limited information in and it can auto-populate a lot of other information. You know, and that experience is in your head goes, insurance is like this. So then when you go into something like commercial, you know, large, complex, I don't think anyone's expecting the parallel, but the drive towards that kind of experience, psychologically, I think you've got the same customer buying insurance and they're having two very buying experiences. And although they can obviously identify that the things are different because they're sophisticated buyers, I think there's a little niggle at the end of the mind going, that must be the end goal. It must be getting closer to that. I don't know. And maybe I'm speaking kind of out of my purview of understanding, but I do think there's something about when we see all this innovation in one side of the industry, it's kind of incumbent upon us to kind of get closer to that and bridge that gap if possible.
Yeah, I think obviously with personal insurance, you're very, very close to the customer, right? And so you can really deliver experiences that we could call it enjoy, but I think just make that process very, very efficient. And also another item, which happens a lot actually. When something happens, people sort of, who do I have that insurance with? So they make that process of getting our support as an industry very, very easy. I think when you move into the commercial side of things, there's many more layers between you and that sort of end customer. So I think one way of actually driving a better experience for them is not only attacking the problem from the customer end, but also from our sort of internal end. And sometimes it's trivial things. So, do I have a piece of technology that can reliably extract, data from the emails I receive from brokers from the PDF files? Because the impact of that is maybe more accurate information. Maybe it's a faster turnaround time to a broker. Maybe I can get that risk covered sooner. So I think there's, it's important to take a step back, look at that sort of supply chain, then focus on the bit where you are. And say, okay, not only how do I benefit myself, but how do I benefit the people on this end and on this end? And sometimes on the left is the customer, on the right is a capacity provider or reinsurer. But I think if everybody attacks these little pockets, I think for the sort of the commercial customer, that experience invariably will get better.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think we've sort of touched on bits of this, but I was going to ask you about the kind of, if you're an incumbent insurer, what do you think are the building blocks that you put in place to kind of drive that innovation today? We'll give you one of the big insurers to play with. What would you do?
Yeah, I think as an incumbent, I think there's different ways to answer this question. So one is like, if I'm inside the incumbent, how do I strategize the innovation and look at the problem? And the other one is, in our case, as a platform supplier or a technology supplier for them. I think one thing that we always encourage is, this is insurance. We know how it works, right? We know what the processes are. We know what our obligations are to the clients, to the regulators, to ourselves internally. But then let's sort of deconstruct it and reconstruct the process. And this is something that comes up, and it comes up when speaking with clients and working with clients and implementing our solutions. One thing we find a lot, it's a very sequential process, right? And so it's okay that, a submission or a slip will come in here and it has to go through A, B, C, D, and it's a very sort of snake-like, step-by-step process, and the process works. It isn't a bad process. then you say, okay, well, this piece of technology is something that you're not able to visualize, but I can because I have the technology. Okay, A, B, C, and D, instead of being sequential, I can now stack them on themselves and they can be a parallel thing. And so, you know, you give him an example, a risk will come in, you know, you have a piece of a financial institution, open market risk comes in. You know, I can run a sanction search and I can maybe run I have some pre-processed claim statistics from you know, segmented by market that I can access at that very initial point in time. Check an underwriting authority, check and risk appetite. Ultimately, you have a lot of that data as soon as it comes in the door. So it isn't a big sort of big bang, you know, AI monster that does something, but just a very simple notion of saying, okay, well, let's approach this part of the puzzle differently. And it makes a very, very big change. It impacts data quality, impacts the, you know, people's time, right? So less keying in, more analyzing, more doing the underwriting or the risk assessment. And so, so I think when working with incumbents, this is an approach to really offer them what the other alternative is. Sometimes they may not want to see that other alternative. And there's a lot of, I think, there's a lot of work that needs to go into that. By that same token, in the incumbents, there no one is best positioned to, you know, to do spring cleaning in their house than the owner of the house itself, right? And so I think, you know, taking that step back, bringing in the right talent if it doesn't already exist in the organization, and having a very open mind on how to achieve that change, I think that's a key thing.
Yeah, I think this kind of lab culture that people are sort of trying to engender in the sort of incumbents is the right way to go. You know, I do think there's a possibility that, you know, you almost need to isolate some capital, isolate some resource, and say, right, almost build, you know, try and build processes from the ground up, but make them profitable. And when they work, then we can plug them into the, you know, to the wider business. You know, do you want to compete with us on some risks as well? That might be quite interesting. And, you know, who wins survives, and a bit more freedom. And we're sort of seeing that type of behavior. But I think it's really interesting that you're from this sort of tech world, but also worked within the insurance industry, because where I think some of the challenges, I always kind of feel a bit depressed when I see this, like there'll be some latest insurtech telling us that insurance is broken, or, you know, it's like, well, it isn't. Like, there's just things you can do better, but you can say that about any industry that's 300 years old, right? I mean, but it's regulated. So it's fine to bring out the idea of like minimum viable products, but you can't have a minimum viable product when that product is an insurance policy that someone can claim against. You know, you can't get that wrong. You know, you can't release a policy that's just, oh, we'll just change it as we go. You know, it doesn't work like that. So there are changes you can make and there are changes you can't make, driven by regulation. But that kind of idea, that principle of people sort of coming to the table and going, oh, it's broken. It's like, as you said, it's not. But there are things that we can do together. So I had a question about open APIs, which is not something that I know a lot about, but I've written a question down here saying, oh, right, open. I think what I actually meant was, I think when I started working in the insurance industry like 15 years ago, you bought massive kind of software packages or IT, and none of it talked to the other. And that was the kind of biggest part of the problem. So scrapping my kind of API nonsense question that I probably sent to you was more about kind of how important is the kind of interconnectivity of the tech, and do you see that as some of the kind of problems that we've had to date, is that without it talking to each other, then you're never going to move forward?
This is actually one of the sort of the big value propositions in INARIIO as well, and when setting it up, you know, coming from the industry, you look at you know, sort of that large monolithic approach to technology serving the insurance market, right? And then there's another large monolith and another, and there's a lack of communication. And there's a lot of workarounds that need to happen, and then the solution is sometimes worse than the problem. You still have rekeying and et cetera, et cetera. So I think both personally and from an INARIIO perspective, we view, and I view that this is over, right? You know, the age of the monolithic system is over. I think you know, the new age coming in is an age where customers get a best-in-class experience, right? So let's say you have an insurance carrier, right? And there's an amazing platform to do pricing or rating, and there's another really great platform that does data mining, extraction from documents, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we aim to achieve at INARIIO not only is a replacement platform, it's a platform where we de-risk the execution risk of combining all these different technologies together and deploying them to a client. And we make them very, very organic. I mean, when it comes to the subject of APIs, which is one very, very dear to me, it's been one of these terms that people have clung on to for dear life. It's one of the new buzzwords or the new old buzzword. It's something we've shown some of our demos. I can teach my mother to make a postman request to an API endpoint. There is no mystery. I mean, your two requirements are a computer and sort of knowing how to read, right? Because it is really, and that's the point of the API. It needs to be something simple where I can, send information or request information or have the system that I'm requesting to do something, or my system do something without all these front end screens in a very sort of non-technical definition of it. Now, when it's just requesting and moving stuff around, I think that doesn't cut it either. It needs to, these API integrations, either open APIs or sort of commercial private APIs, or even just systems talking to each other via API. It needs to really fit in with what we're trying to achieve, right? I like to call it sort of an organic integration, right? So that's that's how you, again, going back to the quote rate bind process, right? You have something like our system sort of sitting in the middle, orchestrating everything that happens, and then it's going through that process, and then when it needs to require a rate, we can fire out a request, bring back that data, do something with that data, actually make it very, very meaningful, rather than the system does A, B, and C, fires out, and a number comes back, and then it stops, and then you have to go in and do something. There's an art to integrating these things. I think the sort of integration revolution is starting now. Why? People starting. That's actually the benefit of API being a buzzword, right? So it's no longer in the domain of the the IT caves, which I used to working at the bottom of a building. It's actually everybody is familiar with it. There's been a lot of education about what they are and what they can provide. I think people are thinking about that. I think everybody's building now their technology to be API ready, or at least have these an integration layer. And then we have technologies like ours, for example. I'm not going to speak about anybody else's technology. I'll speak about ours that actually de-risks this, right? And so I think where it's a lot of the complexity before, when people didn't have monolithic systems, and I have to connect and orchestrate all the sort of big sort of dance move between all these different participants to actually run a process or generate a number, whatever that is, and there was a lot of risk into it. I think this ties again into one of the pieces that insurance companies do insurance, right? So not necessarily you're going to find a profile of a data integration expert. Not all insurance companies have them. Some insurance companies are very, very small. So there's a lot of risk into doing this. I think as that's become commoditized, we're going to see something that people hated before, which was companies with 20 different systems, but this is very, very different. 20 different systems all in orchestration and working together.
Yeah. No, I think just culturally as well, like as people, I've realized how it's that classic thing of as a comedian, I can't remember who it was, but he did this thing about, he was on a plane, and it's the first time he'd been on a plane, and said, oh, by the way, you can all now use Wi-Fi, please log in, here's the code. And then like half an hour into the flight, everyone was like super excited. Half an hour into the flight, the Wi-Fi went down, and they came over going, Wi-Fi went over down, and everyone's going, oh, throwing their toys out the pram. We're like, half an hour ago, you couldn't do this. Now you can, and now you're angry that you can't again. And I think, I know that I obviously use systems at the back end for recruitment, and there's lots of plugins for things like the telephone systems, etc. But what I realized now is choosing a new system, and one of my key factors was how connected is this? How open is this system? Because I want to be able to plug all these things in. I'm not fearful of having multiple systems now, but they have to all talk to each other, because as a user, I want kind of one footprint and then all these systems working behind for me. And I just think the mindset has shifted, you know, away from that being fearful, as in, you know, but you want all these tools to talk to each other, otherwise they become. And I think that's how people now judge that. Personally, that's how I'm sort of hearing people judge things. You know, it's how good are they at talking to each other, rather than individually being brilliant at this one thing. If it doesn't talk to the other things that we have, then that's not helpful.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, and this isn't just a mindset change of the customer that's consuming these things. It's a mindset change also in the vendor. So I mean, we're a vendor,
Sure.
And I think, you know, that willingness to actually play well with other technologies, and you know, to have that degree of confidence of the technology solving the piece of the puzzle that you're solving, and be able to invite others to play or to collaborate. I think you know, that's not only sort of an incumbent or industry responsibility, it's a vendor responsibility. And it's something we've been doing recently, and you know, we've started to announce some of these integrations, others to come. And the idea is, you know, how do we commoditize the ecosystem for the client, right? We know that we're really good at doing this, this, and this. This is not on our roadmap. Let's partner with people that are really good at doing what they want. So I think, you know, if you take a look at it, if you have the industry, it's starting to have that mindset, as you say, is, you know, how interconnected or interconnectable, if that's even a word, you know, is the piece of technology I'm acquiring. When you have the vendors approaching it from the same perspective, it's a very, very powerful combination. It requires a degree of transparency and openness and confidence, but I think that's, you know, some of the things we're working on. We can't really talk about right now, but
Sure. Yeah.
it's a very, very, very powerful combination for us, and obviously for the client. The same way I think the industry should never lose sight of the policyholder as technology practitioners and vendors should never lose sight of delivering a unique and very powerful experience to our customers. And this is one way to do that.
Why do you, I was going to say, well, what do you personally think has made that shift in sort of vendors, that they're sort of now working together? I don't know. Have you got just your take on it? I appreciate I'm not asking you to speak for an entire industry, but I'm interested in your take on it.
Yeah, I can give you my viewpoint. I think everybody will do their own thing. Yeah, there's a couple of things. I think in other industries we've seen how very, very successful that is. So if we look at sort of the sales and marketing industry, right? You know, you look at Salesforce, right? I wish one day we were a Salesforce, and that would make our shareholders very happy.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
Fantastic, and really having this call from a yacht somewhere.
Yeah.
No, but I think you know, Salesforce and others like it went down the route of saying, okay, well, you know, here's our platform, but we're really going to open up so other people can integrate, other people can develop products within our ecosystem, and these products can either be, you know, within our fabric or adjunct to our fabric. And you know, what happens is the clients obviously have the value that they're looking for, and they wouldn't want to move elsewhere. And I think that's slowly coming to our industry as well. It is what's going to, I mean, technology in general is going down that path. So I think vendors are realizing this as well. I mean, there's another point. The insurance industry is probably one of the most hardest industries as a technology vendor to enter. The barrier entry is very, very high. It's a risk management industry, so obviously very risk adverse. You know, people, and this is normal, want to see proven solutions, right? It's very hard to get the foot in the door and actually show what your product can do. So I think also there's value into vendors sort of merging together or collaborating together to make that process easier, you know, to make that sale, if you will. And then I think there's a third part, that when all these technologies work together, they work much, much better, right?
Yeah.
So I always pick on the same example. So it's us in the middle, and we, you know, there's another technology that does a particular task. Now, if we don't play well with them, and they don't play well with us, there's a piece of the puzzle that we're missing. Therefore, the customer experience isn't as great. And maybe from their perspective, if they had to integrate with the legacy system, they wouldn't be able to show their full potential and their full value. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. between people. And I think, that's where the industry will gravitate. You always have the big sort of technology providers, but I think this is a new sort of a paradigm shift, if you will. We're going to see a lot more collaboration between vendors as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, I can see that. And just from the systems that I start to sort of the CRMs, the applicant tracking systems, all those sorts of things that I get exposed to, even they're playing nicer, as it were. You're getting cross sell between them, and they integrate together, and that's, yeah, like I say, that's how I'm judging, because I'm literally going through it at the moment, which is why it's on top of my mind, and it's purely on integration as to why I've turned one down and gone to another. That's really interesting. I mean, that leads us on to saying, I was going to ask you sort of buy versus make. Obviously, there's a certain bias about that.
Oh, buy.
Buy. But I think, I don't even think that's an argument anymore. Personally, I think we've seen that shift towards buy, because personally, that's what I'm seeing. It's more, the roles that we see in technology is more about bringing people in to integrate that technology into the business, not bringing people in to build a system as such anymore. Do you think it's just because the technology's got better, or do you think it's just, I don't know, is it people rolling out and going, we spent so much money making, we may as well buy, or what do you think was behind that?
Yeah, I think there's I think the first point, that buy versus make, as a vendor, again, it's always buy for me, right? But being on the other side as a technology leader within the insurance industry, I think there's been an issue for a very long time whereby the available technology did not cover all the use case scenarios within different insurance companies, right? And I think having platforms that have a good degree of flexibility, that's something that's needed. So I think for the longest time, there's in a very complex industry that was very hard to attract talent into. It was very, very specific, very, very nuanced. There was, an amount of software solutions, but that's not we're not a one size fits all industry. So I think what you started to see was a big trend of, the build, right, or the make. So insurance companies starting to or hiring large amounts of developers and project managers and architects and all these different things to go out and build these solutions. There's a problem. There's a problem in that, is that if you're an insurance company, you're not a software development company. And there's two very different things, right? And not even just getting those first deliveries, but keeping that technology refreshed and even keeping it up to date and modify, that just adds a lot of complexity. So I think you got that on one end. On the other end, it's converged with the commoditization of a lot of technology. So one is infrastructure as a service, right? So the big, I guess the buzzword of 10 years ago was cloud, and not everybody really understood what it was, but now you got AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, SoftLay. I mean, pick your infrastructure as a service. So that's become commoditized. That gives a lot of freedom to then vendors to actually build what's in their heads without having to raise $20 million every time they want to do it. So it really has facilitated that, again, innovation on that side. So you've had these two worlds and they started to collide, and so there's a load of really great solutions out there that are pre-built. It de-risks me financially, it de-risks me from an execution perspective. It's a good degree of customization, and if you take it to that very next level that we've been talking about, once they will start talking to each other, they can actually mix and match the features and functionalities that I want. And so I think the make argument gets less. I think where you'll see still a lot of make is, algorithms and some very strategic parts of data creation and data management that then you feed into these platforms. That's valuable, but building an entire software stack or platform, if I had to do that today, I'd be hard pressed to see where the value was in Europe, just connecting stuff together. Yeah,
no, exactly. And I think you're right. If you look at the banking industry as well, that the secret sauce, the magic will be in the algorithms. It'll be like, how do insurance companies use data, and how they drive value from it, and therefore how do they make themselves more profitable. That will be the thing that you will keep in house, because it will be the thing that makes you you know, your company unique. Conscious of your time, so I wanted to start wrapping things up, but I wanted to just talk to you as a kind of relatively new 3-year in business, how you grew your team and how that came about, because some people stumble into people in lifts, some people are a bit more strategic. So, you know, how big's the team now, and how did you all come together?
So we're 14 people in the team today, and we're actually spread across the globe, right? So, you know, there's a bunch of us in Barcelona, and we have Paris, and we have Lebanon, and we have Bilbao, and we have Galicia, which is a region here in Spain as well. So we're all separated, all sort of dispersed, and there's a lot to be said about the effectiveness of I don't call it remote working, I just call it working, because it is
Yeah, sure.
You know, I think it's a combination of people that, you know, we've met and worked together in the past, and a lot of new friends as well that have come into the family, and that's been very, very important to, you know, even when trying to innovate and trying to build something new, you have the baggage of preconception and bias, right? And so bringing people in and facilitating an environment where the people coming can actually challenge the subject matter experts and say, you know, do you really want to do it this way? I think it's a very powerful combination. So, you know, chance, luck, synchronicity, and just you know, having a keen eye for hiring people.
Yeah.
And we're lucky because we have a team composition which I think summarizes really well the sort of skill sets that you need in those first 3 or 4 years to break even, but then are going to have the right tools to then take that company into more established, you know, always conserving sort of the entrepreneurial spirit, but, you know, when you have 4, 6, 10 clients, you know, the company does need to shift a bit into I wouldn't call it BAU, but it's a slightly different way of doing things. So we have a very multidisciplinary team that are able to do that shift because they've already worked both in startups and in sort of BAU environments, highly regulated BAU environments.
Mm-hmm. And what stage are you at in terms of did you raise investment, or have you been through some you know, fundraising before? Or?
In past lives, yes. In this one, we've been very self-sufficient. Very self-sufficient in that aspect, and there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one of the reasons for it is, you know, we've been able to sort of bootstrap until where we are today. And it's given us, in my opinion, a degree of freedom on, you know, choosing how to come into the market and also what to focus on first. That doesn't mean, you know, you're never open to capital in the future, but we've been very, very efficient with that, very, very nimble, and yeah, so we're very happy with our progress today.
Good. Yeah, I think it allows you to write your own ticket. I think if you can get to a point where, you know, you I mean, at the end of the day, if you can get to a point where you're a viable business without taking that outside investment, I just, that's my bias preference. But I know a lot of people have come on and said that's the European model versus the US model, which is have an idea, go and get funding, and then build it. And you know, it's not to say one's wrong or the other, but I think my personal preference is that if you can get there, you've got the freedom, like you say, it's your money, you can do with it what you like, and build the thing. But once you've built something and you've proven it, you're just in a better position. If you want to go out and set the terms of engagement, you can do it strongly. So, but you know, what do I know?
There's actually an interesting point there, and I think and it relates back into incumbency and all that. The same way sometimes we go in to do demos with incumbents, and it takes them a while to assimilate. We're accomplishing the same thing, but a very, very different way. To our eyes, more efficient, more optimized, but you know, everybody's. And that also happens with investment as well. When you're on the fringe of, especially in I think what you have is a market which is insurance, which a lot of external capital does not ultimately understand. You know, they don't have that expertise, maybe within sort of the personal lines, but when you talk about commercial lines and you talk about a bordereau, or you talk about IBNR or whatever that is, then you start to lose them. And it really is you know, our industry is nuanced. It does have specificities to it. And so I think what you see there, especially when the area where we are, which is sort of in the back end, if you will, you know, connecting how great and how beneficial what we're building is to someone that doesn't fully understand this segment of the industry. They're very, very smart people, but this is an industry that does require expertise and experience. And sometimes you can have that same sort of challenge that sometimes you have with the incumbents. They just really don't get, well, why do you want to do it that way? Inventing the wheel. Said, well, actually, for this problem, the wheel needs to be reinvented, because the wheel that currently exists is just a square, really.
Well, I'm all for rounder wheels. That's a really nice definition. I'm going to leave that as a neat definition of innovation, a slightly rounder wheel. But look, Frank, I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for being a guest on the show, and really excited to see what you guys get up with in the future. So, thanks very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.